Hello, everyone, and welcome this morning or this afternoon, depending upon what time zone you're in. I'm your host, Shibani Joshi. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how HR is evolving and ways executives can meet these new challenges established by job seekers to gain a competitive advantage today and in the uncertain months and years ahead. I'm joined for this discussion by ZipRecruiter Chief Economist, Julia Pollak. Welcome, Julia.
Thanks so much, Shibani.
I'm excited to talk about this because this is such a top of mind topic, no matter what industry you're in. And before we get started, I want to let our audience members know as they continue to join us in this breakout session today. This is an interactive session. We want to hear from you. We have a poll question on the right-hand side of your screen, and we also are taking questions throughout the session, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. And with that, let's get started. Julia, I want to start things off by framing the current environment, the current labor market for both job seekers and employers. Tell me about it.
So for the past 21 months, this labor market has been on fire, Shibani. I mean, it's been adding 500,000 jobs a month on average. That is more than 3 times the 2019 monthly average. And those jobs have been unusually high quality jobs, unusually highly paid jobs, and they've been added across a much broader range of industries than ever before. So it's been a really fantastic labor market for job seekers. At the same time, you've probably been following the headlines and know that the labor market has cooled in the last 2 months. And we saw the biggest drop in job openings ever outside the pandemic in August. And then the September job gain number was the smallest since April of 2021. And so it does appear as though employers are pulling back a little bit. But still, even that number, the smallest number in a year and a half, was 60% more than that 2019 average. So still huge, healthy, broad-based job gains. And it still remains the best time to be a job seeker and find good work, and one of the toughest times to be an employer seeking to hire.
Yeah, we see this such a dichotomy, Julia, and a mixed picture, a mixed bag in terms of what we're seeing with economic headlines, with being in a technical recession, uncertainty. I live here in the Bay Area, and we're seeing tech companies starting to tighten. So how do you anticipate change over the next few years, or few months, because we're living in a sort of a month-to-month sort of environment? How do you go about planning and thinking about what the environment is going to be like in this uncertain time frame?
So the Fed has made it clear that they'll do whatever it takes to rein in inflation. And if you talk to most US households, the rising interest rates are not affecting them that directly, because about 2/3 of American homeowners are locked into sub 4% mortgages. Only around 2 to 3% have adjustable rate mortgages. So when interest rates go up, their daily costs of living are not being affected. What is affecting them is inflation. And so it is key that we get inflation under control. That said, these rising interest rates are a problem for businesses, particularly the most capital intensive businesses. And they've had a very, very marked cooling effect on certain industries like housing. And in this last jobs report, we start to see some of the effects. So, whenever businesses feel uncertain, they try to conserve cash and cut costs. The first place they tend to cut is on marketing spend and advertising. So we saw advertising companies shed about 5,000 jobs. When households feel a little nervous, they cut back on their big ticket item sort of spending. It's also, anything that involves taking out a loan is going to be harder right now because those interest rates are so high. No one wants to refinance their mortgage to, put a pool in the backyard or to buy a car right now. And so we saw car dealerships shed jobs. We saw building supply stores shed jobs. So there certainly is some sectoral pain right now. The question is how wide that is going to sort of spread, how widely that'll spread, and how long it'll last. Hopefully, we'll see maybe 2 to 3 quarters of negative consumer spending growth without too many harsh labor market effects. And then we'll be back off to the races with low inflation and interest rates coming down again.
I think what you're pointing out, Julie, is there's still a lot of unknowns ahead of us and how it's going to affect consumers and businesses. But as you mentioned, we're rolling into this with record number of job openings and a hard time filling those openings. And I want to bring in our poll results because the HR needs are still there and will still be there even through 2023. And I want to bring to you what the poll results show, and I want your response on this. What is top of mind for your 2023 recruitment planning? We had 22% say budget and resource restraints, 22% hiring fees, almost 50%, almost 46% said competition for talent, and then 20% said candidate scarcity. Give me your reactions on that. Competition for talent.
Absolutely. I mean, so this has been a very, very challenging environment for employers, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The number one reason is candidate scarcity, right? A shortage of qualified candidates. Had the pandemic never taken place, there'd be about 4 million more people in the US labor force than there are now. And so, for the past year and a half, companies have just struggled to find workers and get the normal sort of volumes of applications from qualified candidates that they used to. I mean, the US Army just missed its recruiting goal by 25%. And, public companies, private companies, they don't need to disclose that kind of information. So we don't know how many other companies are in the same boat, but I promise you a lot of them are. And at the same time that they're struggling to find new candidates, they're also facing this massive turnover tsunami. So each month of the last year and a half, there have been about 20% more people quitting their jobs each month than was normal before the pandemic. So companies are trying to hold the people they've got down and failing, and they're struggling to find new ones. And at the same time, there are 50% more job openings roundabout than there were before the pandemic. Those job openings are largely better quality. A whole host of industries and occupations have shifted towards being remote. That's extremely popular among job seekers. About 60% of job seekers tell us each month that they would prefer to find a remote job, but only 12% of jobs in our marketplace right now offer that. And even if every remote that could feasibly be done remotely, every job were remote, that would only be about a third of the economy. And so the vast majority of jobs are on-site, in person. That's the only way they could be done. Passenger transport, food preparation. You can't do those things from home. Right. And so those employers are in a particularly tough bind because their jobs have become relatively less attractive, relatively harder to fill. And they're not just facing competition from the fast food shop across the street that's paying $18 an hour and is basically the same. They're facing competition from industries, companies that have been able to shift call center jobs into remote jobs. And that is the challenge. They're competing with a wider set of players across a much wider geographic area than ever before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different ballgame, a whole host of challenges that we haven't seen before. Why is employer branding key in your mind for facing these challenges as we go into the new year?
So with these challenges being so enormous, so huge, companies have had to make a very sharp strategic sort of shift, and HR has become much more important. It's gained a space in the boardroom, and it's had to shift focus from sort of a compliance and admin-based, focus to being more entrepreneurial and adopting a sort of sales and marketing mindset. And that involves things like proactively finding leads, building a compelling employee value proposition, propagating that message out there, reaching people, reaching an audience where they are. So through social media, and that involves sort of a serious employer branding effort. It involves internal conversations about how we want to differentiate ourselves, what our core values are, what our culture is, the steps we're going to take to sort of enshrine that at every level of the organization, at every stage, from the job posting to onboarding to offboarding, and then implementing those changes. And that's been the sort of big shift in HR that we've seen. It's become more important, it's become more visible, it's become more central to management, and then its focus has shifted from one of sort of filling out forms to creating delight, telling stories, being persuasive.
I want to remind everyone here, this is an interactive session. We're talking with ZipRecruiter's chief economist, Julia Pollak. She's happy to answer your questions. We do have a chat function and a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions, please put them in there. We'd love to have her answer the questions that come to top of mind for us, but also for you. So put them in there so we can make sure Julia can answer your questions. And Julia, what you're talking about is a whole new role in HR, right? Employee and employer branding. How does employer branding attract job seekers? And what are you seeing in terms of its importance in not just recruiting, but retention?
When a job seeker comes to ZipRecruiter and looks at job postings, when there are so many alternatives at their fingertips, when there are 50% more postings and openings than there were before the pandemic, they really can pick and choose. I mean, many job seekers are weighing multiple options. They're not under financial pressure. They've got 50% more in their checking accounts than they did before the pandemic, thanks to the very generous COVID response that the government implemented. And so they have some time. And in that environment, you need to really sort of sell candidates on the employment that you're offering them. That involves sort of delightful copywriting in your job ads. It involves a whole host of things that you can do, video content, right? A range of things, but you really need to reach people and stand out and differentiate yourself.
What are companies missing or making mistakes on as they're implementing this new approach to recruiting? I'm sure you've seen a lot. What can our audience members learn from what's come before them?
So I think the reason so many companies are sort of falling behind and failing and haven't sort of met this moment is that almost everyone from the top of the US government onwards thought this moment would be temporary, right? We started off with 15 days to stop the spread. We started off with economists telling us inflation was transitory. We started off with CEOs saying, hey, everything's going to be totally fine and back to normal when people are back in the office on March 15th, right? We had politicians saying people will come back to work the minute the expanded unemployment benefits expire in September, right? We've had all of these moments when we hoped that things would go back to normal, and the world hasn't gone back to normal.
Right.
I think another issue is that when businesses grow, they sort of succumb to the law of large organizations. They become a little bit slow and stodgy, and you need ever more people and ever more time to get anything done. And the problem in the last 2 years has been that everything has sped up. So the shift to remote work accelerated 50 years. The shift to the adoption of e-commerce accelerated 10 to 20 years. The labor market became so much faster with 20% more quits every month, 15% more hires every month, just such an incredible amount of churn that companies couldn't keep up. And they kept hoping that this would be a temporary moment. I think I'm here to say it wasn't temporary. Many of these trends will be here for a long time. We are a labor-constrained labor market for the foreseeable future. Population growth has slowed. Immigration is not sort of expanding to make up for that shortfall. And so this is the environment we're in. And if you make changes now to meet this moment, if you succeed in recruiting and retaining talent in the toughest environment imaginable, you will also have a competitive edge when the labor market is slacker. So it is a good idea to make the kinds of changes that the sort of leaders, the winners in the war for talent have made.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, Julia. We are heading into a tighter environment, technical recession that's going to have some increasing impact on employers out there. How should recruiting practices merge and morph in this to cut their teeth so that you are ready when the end of this, we come out of this and we're all in a better position, in a stronger position?
Right. So, I think we all look at the headlines in the jobs report and see how wildly job gains can swing from one month to another. In the worst of times, the economy loses up to 9 million jobs in a year. In the best of times, it gains 7 million jobs in a year. That's huge variation. But hiring is actually much more stable than that picture suggests. And that's because the vast majority of hiring is not to add headcount, but simply to replace turnover. And so in a typical month, in the worst of times, the number of new hires ranges from 4 million to 7 million in the best of times, which is not such a wide range at all.
Right.
A lot of turnover is like regular as rain. It's totally predictable. Companies need to hire in good times or bad.
That's surprising, right?
Exactly. And so, things change. Often companies lay off HR professionals first in a downturn. And so hiring teams need to keep hiring, but with a much leaner team. And so what's going to happen is some of those teams are going to have to become a lot more efficient, and they're going to have to rely on the best tools and technologies available to give them superpowers, right? To give their hiring team superpowers so that they can still complete their mission and hit their goals and hit their targets.
What are some of those apps, tools that you can recommend? And I want to throw in a question that we have from Fred here right after that.
Sure. So there's a whole host of tools emerging, and because there's been such a focus on this issue, I feel like there's a new vendor popping up every minute to help employers recruit and retain talent. But the main tools are things like job boards, job marketplaces. You can use those incredibly effectively if you leverage the best tools that they offer. So, for example, if you post a job and advertise it on a job board, but you require the candidate to click on a link and then come to your website and fill everything in again, you're going to lose more than half of them.
That's right.
The best way to do it is to pursue an ATS integration so that people can apply with one click. And that way you'll get far more applications and also far more high quality applications. So that's one tool that works. Another is to lean into proactive sourcing. So, 20 years ago, about 4% of Americans were recruited to their jobs. It was usually just the sort of best and the brightest top talent that people wanted to poach. But by the start of 2020, that had risen to 18%. And in our recent survey of people hired in the last 6 months, that was 37%. Okay?
Wow.
So companies are not just posting jobs and sitting back and waiting for applicants anymore. They're proactively looking through resume databases, through professional networking sites. They're finding people with the right skills they need, and then they're reaching out to them proactively with personalized, emails and text messages and what have you, and saying, "You're a great fit for our role. We want you." That's an experience that candidates love, even passive talent, even people on the sidelines of the labor market, and it's very effective.
Well, conversely, I'm going to bring in, we have a question from Fred here. With a growing concern for a recession, how do you believe this will impact how candidates choose their next role in the next 18 months? You were just talking about the hiring perspective, but what about from the candidate's perspective?
So at ZipRecruiter, we run something called the Job Seeker Confidence Index, a monthly survey of job seeker confidence. And actually, the October survey just went live today on our website. And that shows that, yes, job seeker sentiment, job seeker confidence has been sliding over the last few months. It is sort of at the lowest level it's been all year, and that's affecting job search behavior in a whole range of ways. So number one, employed job seekers are feeling a bit more worried about their job security. They are becoming less likely to quit without another job lined up. Unemployed job seekers are becoming less likely to negotiate their offer and more likely to want to sort of seal the deal right away. So it does suggest that the hiring environment could, for a while, become a bit less challenging for employers, that they'll be able to find a few more candidates. Perhaps they won't face quite as much turnover, and that they'll be more easily able to close those candidates.
As we wrap up our conversation, Julian, it's been so interesting and insightful here. What strategies are the most critical for talent HR teams to deploy right now? Because you've given us a whole host of things to think about, but many of our audience members are going back to their teams and thinking, okay, what are my priorities? What should they be? What are some strategies that they can start to implement right now?
Well, I think there are three sort of fronts on which you can kind of wage this war. One is by sweetening offers. So, what can you offer? What can you provide that is of high value to job seekers and perhaps at minimal cost to yourself? And that's the wonderful thing about this moment. There have been so many exciting new startups and vendors coming up with creative ways to create win-win-wins for employees, employers, and the economy. Things like earned wage access apps are so popular with job seekers. They also reduce absenteeism. They reduce cash toll fraud. They improve timesheet compliance. They do a whole lot of things, and they improve recruitment and retention. So I would encourage companies to think very creatively about what they can offer to job seekers that'll improve their lives, make them less likely to leave, and make them more loyal. I mean, the kinds of perks that were usually reserved for sort of Silicon Valley big tech companies like fertility benefits are now being offered by Walmart, right? So there's a very competitive fight going on when it comes to benefits and perks and pay. The second area where you have some leeway is through reducing requirements, reducing irrelevant requirements, and shifting from hiring for degrees and for experience, which are really just kind of proxies for productivity and for skill, and more directly trying to measure skill itself, perhaps through skills assessment during the hiring and onboarding process, or during the recruiting and application process. So that is something that many companies have been doing, so they don't unnecessarily weed out really great candidates. They're taking a more holistic approach. They're understanding that a resume is just a resume, and you actually need to look at the whole person. And many are kind of taking a bit of a risk, taking on a more sort of open hiring approach, and having some success with that, and learning how actually to identify who will be a good fit. And then finally, they need to speed up time to hire. So in this moment, when people have got competing offers, if you take 3 weeks to get back to them, they're gone.
Right.
And especially this holiday hiring season, we've seen that that's really where the competition is taking place this year. It's not so much on benefits and schedule flexibility as it was last year. This year, it's all about speed. The major companies hiring holiday workers have, in many cases, dispensed with interviews altogether. Once they get an application online, they're responding to a candidate within 25 minutes with an offer, an on-the-spot offer, right then and there. So that's a big change. We've seen a lot of companies shift to having one cell phone interview that ends with an on-the-spot offer, a contingent offer, obviously. But that's the kind of speed that has become sort of table stakes in just the last few months.
Shorten the time to the offers, quick, actionable recruiting. Great tips. This has been a great discussion, Julia. Really appreciate your time and valuable information. And I know our audience did too. Thank you so much, Julia from ZipRecruiter. And thanks to everybody for joining us.